think of the mountain of things that we've done in our lives that are impossible, that are crazy. Even just getting here. I forget what the statistic of like, how many, before we're born, how many have to fight to get there. We made it. So it's like, if we can do that journey to cling, to come into an existence, I think the benefits and the ability of a person to learn some aspect of guitar to enhance their productions, because I view that as texture. Because when people ask me, what do you think of guitar? I see it as texture, not the primary focus.
What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Qs Podcast, a weekly podcast dedicated to all things production and library music, where we talk about industry topics and explore how you can grow your career as a production music composer. If this is your first time here, welcome. Whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio podcast on the go, I just want to thank you for spending part of your day with me. This episode is made possible by today's sponsor, you, the family, friends, and patrons of 52 Qs who help keep the podcast, the channel, and everything running. We're 100% community supported, so if you want to learn more about how you can help support 52 Qs and also unlock community perks like live streams, workshops, Zoom coaching sessions, and a ton more, be sure to click on the links in the description for more information. And a super quick programming note, the weekly community Q critique and feedback portion of the podcast has actually been pulled out and made into its own video here on the YouTube channel. So while it won't be in the audio podcast moving forward, I feel like it's going to be seen by more folks as its own individual video in the YouTube channel, as opposed to kind of being put on the end of an hour-long podcast episode. So if you're looking for the Q review, then be sure to check out the YouTube channel. I will be posting those earlier in the week, moving forward. And I'd love to know your thoughts. Let me know what you think about that in the comments below. So several weeks ago, I had the honor of being featured on the Songwriting for Guitar podcast with host Mike Meiers. And we really hit it off. It was super easy to talk to, amazing guy, very, very friendly. And we just went on for like an hour. And I thought, man, he has so much great information, especially coming from a guitarist perspective in production music. So I was so thrilled to welcome him over here on today's episode. I am so excited to be joined by Mike Meiers, the owner, proprietor, runner, host, the brains behind the Songwriting for Guitar podcast. And he was so gracious to have me on his podcast that I thought, you know what? We got on so swimmingly last time. I had to bring you over. Mike, it's good to see you again, my man. How are you?
Dave, I am stoked. Yeah, our conversation was so much fun. The food analogies, the consistent. It really felt like too. It was just a conversation, and I think that's why it was well received, because it was cool to dive in. So I'm pumped to continue.
Yeah, you know what? I actually went into ChatGPT and I said explain production music using cooking as a metaphor, right? And I asked the robot overlords, and they gave me a lot of metaphor and similes, the exact things that we talked about, like about ingredients and all that stuff. And if you're wondering how that conversation went, I'm going to have links to all of that in the show notes. So you could check that out for sure. Go subscribe, whether you're a guitarist or not. I've subscribed. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like I'm like, do I belong here? I'm a drummer. Am I allowed to enjoy this? But I have really, really enjoyed hearing from the guitarist perspective, even though I'm not a songwriter, nor am I a guitarist. I've been really enjoying listening to your podcast, and you have guests from all over the music industry, not just guitarists. But yeah, wanted to have you on, and just one of the things I always like starting every interview with is knowing that a career in music takes many, many paths. You know, some folks just get lucky. Some folks can't not write unless their life depended on it. Some folks did the university route and everything. But tell us a little bit about your own journey to where you are now.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, as I think about it, like, I feel like in interviews, people go, music has always been it's always been the thing there. But it really, for the most part it was, because I was not like an athletic child that was like drawn. I went to Catholic school too. So it was like, the basketball team was like 4 people and they had to pull in like 3 nuns. I mean, but it just wasn't a thing that I was really driven towards. But for some reason, music was always like the thing that really connected. And like my first instrument was like the piano. So it was predominantly, that was kind of like the forefront until I got into high school, blah, blah. And then fast forward, I got a guitar. It was tough. So I did what any, hardworking musician would do. I threw it in the closet and forgot about it for like several years until I was like, there was something that I was like, I'm going to start, something clicked. And I think it was my love of like punk rock and, all these, friends were in bands and I was like, that's a thing. I got to do that. And so my senior year was not buckling down for studying and going off to university. It was studying guitar and just becoming, just obsessed. And then that led to terrible bands that I was in. Lots of bad bands, awful bands. Like some of the songwriting, like awful songwriting, just terrible. But I did it anyway because it was just like, I was like, but I took it so seriously. Probably if you go back and, I had the serious face of like, this is the real deal. This is the band.
This is
and then,
art, man.
This is all about it. And, we did terrible tours that, barely made any money, sleeping in vans. Then I started a band that did pretty like better. Like, we got on Warped Tour, which when the punk world, that was a good thing.
Huge. Yeah.
That was great.
That's the dance, man.
It was only like 2 days, but hey, man, it was like we had catering. You don't have to go and, piece together a meal somewhere or just, I was vegetarian. So it's like eating a plethora of Subway sandwiches that just had vegetables and cheese, and like it was actually a meal. But then eventually that led to, things wound down. I was working a ton of weird jobs. I was a manager at a car wash. It was awful. People yelling. That I started teaching guitar at this really small school that was just starting up where I lived at the time in Pittsburgh. And I thought that was going to be my whole gig for the rest of my life. Because at that point I was like, I'm pushing 30 soon. This is it. This is where life ends. I did what I could. The band didn't make it because the narrative I had was this is the only way you can make it. And I had friends that had gone to music school, but then, they were teaching, they were settling down, they were getting married. And I was like, I guess this is it. But then there was something that just bothered me. And it was just like, is this it? I don't mind it, but I feel like and I think everybody can relate to that moment where they sit there and they're like, is this really it? Is there more?
Yeah.
I feel like I could do something else. And I was just, watching TV and there was background music to a commercial. And I was like, I could do that. Okay, then why aren't you? Oh, okay, well, because I don't know what to do or how to get there.
Right.
So then that is really where I feel my schooling really started. The band was a type of schooling, but this was now like, okay, I've now even pinpointed this very specific thing because I felt like a band, we didn't have that clear goal or like line to do the thing. I was like, okay, music and TV and film. How does this happen? That started a plethora of courses, reading, deep diving, opening up GarageBand that I was like, oh, they're not bad. And just making awful songs again and again and again and again and again that literally for 2-3 years, I was working really hard at this, that I got a placement. And I was like, I was like, because it was like I was co-writing a ton. Before I actually got into the world of production music, I started just doing full songs. I was like writing full songs and building out. I didn't even know production music was a thing. I thought it was just like, oh, you mean instrumentals? They take an instrumental from a full song and they were like, no, there's another thing.
Right.
But
Yeah. They just strip out the vocals and use it. Yep.
I did like the full song thing. And then eventually, as I got better and better over time, then it led to that route of, doing production music, getting, consistency in placements. That took a while, but it made sense because the very first conference I went to, there was a guy that had a really cool job. He was, it was for a company called Team One. And afterwards I was like, what you do, how do I do that? And he was like, Mike, I could explain, but it won't make sense. And then he just explained this weird wonky journey. And what I'm telling you right now, I'm like, oh, that's what he means. Because like, what? You did classical piano, then you're in punk bands, then you work at a car wash, and it's really disjointed. It doesn't make sense. Because what I was given, I thought it was a straight and narrow, and now I realized, no, it's this weird, wonky journey that is still going, and I'm still learning. I'm still taking tons of courses and still reading.
Everybody's journey's like that. Mm-hmm. You show me any composer in the production music industry, or just any artist really, and they start out thinking one thing, then life throws them a curveball, and then they go through all of these things, and then so many times end up doing the thing that they set out to do, but it just took a totally circular path to get there. I remember that, and I think I did a podcast episode thinking that, I had to go to school and I had to get a doctorate in film scoring, and or if I didn't move to LA, I'd never be on TV and all of this stuff. And there's a friend of mine who did that, like went to Berkeley, has a doctorate in film music and all of this. And I remember thinking, oh man, where Danny is, that's where I want to be. And then I had the epiphany that we're doing the same job with the same publisher. In fact, we do some co-writes together now, and we do co-scoring, not scoring, but bespoke music. And I'm like, that was Danny's journey to get to where he is. My journey, took me through marching band and governor's school and playing a bunch of timpani, and then getting into web design, and then teaching drum set lessons before eventually winding up here. And so your story rings very, very familiar. And I bet there are a lot of folks out there listening right now who maybe they're wrestling with, man, if only I had done this thing, then I could have the success. And I remember just that imposter syndrome, because I didn't have that pedigree that I thought,
Oh, the what if, I think, is heavy. I think everybody, but it's the two, what did somebody say once? The two F's. I'm paraphrasing, like either it's the what if, the if, or the failure. It's like, which one is going to be heavier? And to me, the what if factor was too heavy for me to ignore it. I was like, man, I can't imagine if I just sat on that couch still in the same apartment, working the same job, being like, 5 years, 6 years later, I bet I could write this. Why aren't you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What ifs are haunting, and what ifs, you carry what ifs long enough and they start becoming regrets, and then you look back and, I'll be 50 this year. I'm 50, right? I'll be turning 50 this year. And I remember a big old what if that I think is really my only career regret. I wanted to march drumline for DCI, right? Drum Corps.
Yeah.
And I was on the line and I just dropped out because I was stupid and didn't feel like I didn't want to do it. It felt like too much of a hassle or whatever. And I look back now and I want to reach back and slap 20-year-old Dave in the face. Like, what do you think? This is literally your only opportunity to do this thing, which is looming so big in your world. And what ifs can really stick on you.
But that's interesting because probably what happened later on is like you got more patient with yourself. You got more accepting with like yourself and allowing the process to develop, where I think sometimes when I don't know, what is it? The brain doesn't develop until you're like 25, 26.
Yeah.
So
and a lot of it was like body issues. I am much more comfortable in my body now, but when you're 20 and 21 and I was like, fat band nerd. And like, I was like, I don't want to take a shower in front of other dudes. Right. And so I don't want to sleep on gym floors. And again, looking back on it now, it seems ridiculous, but I think that's what 30 years of perspective can give you.
Well, you know what? Exactly that. And 30 years of experience and stories and seeing other people and realizing, oh, wait a minute, everyone's self-conscious,
That's right.
if not more self-conscious than me.
Yeah, everybody is dealing with their own bag of insecurities, right? Yeah, that's one, other than... my beard, I'm really happy with my beard, getting a little bit more gray.
Dude, your beard looks great.
Thanks, man.
I saw your episode. What was it? You had Clint on the podcast too, and Clint has a great beard. Yeah. Both of you, he gave me, he told me all these things like you should start using with beard. I was like, I don't use any of that.
That guy has his beard game is on point.
The lines are always finite and
his
perfect. I'm
so
just
clean,
like,
man.
oh.
Yeah, but one of the big advantages of getting older, and there are some downsides, waking up hurting and your back and just walking to the garbage can and back is an issue, but not giving a crap what anybody thinks. Mm-hmm. That's a real upside to getting older, because I don't care. I don't care what anybody thinks of my glasses. I'm going to go out in flip flops and shorts. I don't care.
And I think that's what, maybe this also too, when you start doing the things you love, you start getting more and more comfortable with that, because it's a part of you and you're like, oh, I am okay. I am doing okay. And that you start holding yourself a little bit differently. And I think that actually attracts where you need to go and the right people, because that sort of energy vibes well, because we always talk about like, oh, they give me weird vibes or whatever. But when you're around someone that's comfortable, that's, who they are, they're not feeling like insecure, but they're feeling like, hey, so glad you're here. You're like, wow, this feels great.
Yeah, I want to be around this off that energy. More. Yeah. 100%. And ultimately it's confidence, whether it's a confidence of getting older, whether it's a confidence of your skills or just confidence in believing in yourself.
Did that happen to you because of I know I'm flipping this. I'm like, now let me hear. Did you notice like when you started teaching too, like you started to be more receptive to that, or just notice a lot more
100%.
People's insecurities? Because that was what was great about teaching for me.
Teaching for me, as soon as I realized that I didn't have to be like the sensei snatch the pebble from my hand expert. Like I don't have to know everything all the time, all at once. As soon as I got over that little ego hang up, teaching became much easier.
Yeah.
Because if I don't know it, I can find it, and let's find it together. Yeah. And it created in me a deeper thirst for learning. Like I'm a much better student since I started teaching.
100%. I agree totally with that. Isn't it funny when you start teaching, you worry like, I'm going to teach you everything I know in a day. And then you realize, oh, wait a minute. We're still going through the bare basics 4 months later. Yeah, Never mind.
Why do you think my podcasts are an hour and 20 minutes long? Unedited. We're not going to edit any of this stuff. Yeah, I was talking to somebody about, it was an interview with John Mayer.
Okay.
And his podcast style is so much different than his YouTube style. And he is like the filmmaker, and I'm like the classroom lecturer. And so it's just a really, really dramatic change. So let's change gears a little bit. Otherwise we will be here for an hour and 20 minutes, because I could just talk to you all day. You run songwriting for guitar, but knowing that like writing for sync and all of that is big and prevalent in your mind. Do you do a lot of songwriting, or is it mostly instrumental, or is it kind of half and half?
I see those two buckets. Those are my two primary buckets that I spend a lot of time, doing. So it's production music and it's full songs with artists, but artists they're gearing towards licensing. So it's like we're writing, like I live in Nashville, and so people assume like, oh, you're a track guy for country. Nope, unless I get a brief and they need it. That's right. It ain't happening. But most of the time I'm writing with artists that are, for me, like the voice side, especially within sync, people are like, well, what's something that's syncable? And I'm like, well, better be a good vocal. And so when I find an artist that like has a great vocal, great voice, and they're telling something that is like pulls me in, and I go like, oh, I'd listen to you if I didn't know you.
Yeah.
That's a person that I need to write with. That's a person I need to learn from. But those are the two realms that I spend most of my time, because I love both of them. They're a little bit different but similar. But I find that my skill set in both are strong, and so that's where I kind of go back and forth between.
In your community and in your listeners, do you find folks pretty receptive to sync, or are they a lot of kind of like guitarists who want to be artists, and they're thinking like songwriting modality?
Well, you know what? I think at first, we have some that are just like songwriters. They just want to get better. They want to get better at communicating a song, or they've been doing it for a while, but there gets a point where you feel like you're just hitting your head against the wall. And it's just like, these challenges that go around where people are like, write a song, every day for 30 days. Yeah, if you're using the same chord voicing and the same thing, you're going to fall into the same habits, and you're going to get the same song 30 days in a row. And it's just so we have a lot of people where that's been happening. But then as I introduce, inevitably I talk about sync a lot, because they're like, well, what do you do? And I'm like this. And they're like, I didn't even know this was a thing. And I'm like, it is. And so to me, to open up that window and show them that, listen, this is a great opportunity because there's a need. I think maybe that's why I fell away from writing, doing the country pop thing, because it's a lot of just like, cool, you're writing a whole bunch, and then, okay. And it's crickets. But meanwhile, to get something where here's the need, we need you to fill this need right now because we just got this. Can you do that? Yes or no? Yes. Go make the thing, go submit it. There's a process, and I know where it's going to go, and I know what's going to happen next. Yep. With sometimes writing for an artist or getting a publishing deal, it's like, okay, we're going to wait around for a little bit. And I think
having somewhere to point your creative energies can be
so
really
helpful.
It takes one of the hugest components of writing, which is inspiration, right? It kind of takes care of that on some level. Obviously there's creativity and inspiration, but when you open up a blank DAW with zero direction, that's overwhelming. For me, that's paralyzingly massive. I can't do that much at all.
And I think that's what is slightly refreshing to people, because when they realize, there's some growth and there are things you got to learn, but like, here's something that's going on right now that you can do. Here's something, and like, go to Tune. When I show, it's always funny when I'm like, one of the first things, just go to tunefind.com and just let's take a look on what's getting placed. They're like, wow, is this, it's like, why is this legal? Can they show? Yeah, of course it is. It's like, you can go and you can find all these different songs, but I find for them, it's a new way, if not like a refreshing way to reinvigorate the songwriting, because they're also listening to a whole bunch of new things that they haven't heard before. And so sometimes it's just pulling them out of their comfort zone, the thing that they've been used to for so long, to suddenly expose them to like brand new things. And suddenly that re-engages them. And maybe it's like, I guess songwriting or composition's like a prism. When you turn it a little bit of a different way, the sunlight hits it, and then you get a different reflection. So you see everything in a different way. And I think that's what kind of keeps them going.
Oh, I like look at you with the metaphors. Yeah, you're right. I'm like, wow, it is like a prism. You shine.
I just said that casually. I have it plastered on my wall. Just be like prism analogy.
Oh my gosh, no, that's perfect. Oh, I am yoinking that. Yeah, for sure. As a guitarist, I hope you realize, and we talked about this when I was over on your show, like what a superpower being a guitarist, being a talented, accomplished guitarist really is in the world, or in a world which is so dominated by MIDI. And I am a MIDI composer. Even though there's a drum set in the background, I'm much more likely to program my drum than to actually play drums. I have guitars hanging on the wall. They look fantastic in the background of the shot, but I would not call myself a guitarist. And I know you do, but I hope your audience realizes what an advantage that can really be, because the bar for guitar is really, really high. And I've talked about this before, how I have a contract with the library and they actually forbid using MIDI guitar in the contract. Like I'm in breach of contract if I reach for like session guitarist. Right. And no matter how hard I try, I could spend like an hour programming like native instrument strummer and everything. And I did this once. I spent probably an hour or 2 hours like fine tuning all the articulation so it sounded like an acoustic guitarist. And I'm like, man, this sounds really good. You get kind of ear blind to it. And I'm not a guitarist, so I don't have the finely tuned palette to be able to determine all of the flavors, right? So I'm like, this is great. And I played it for the publisher, and I am not joking. He said to me, the first thing he said, sounds good. The guitar's fake. Oh my gosh.
And you just see that hour of just like, this is glorious. And then they're just like, this is
I will do better with rudimentary guitar skills than I could with the most expensive guitar plugin.
100% right there. Yep. And that's the thing too. I think some people, maybe the reason guitar seems intimidating for some is because of some myths that they believe. Number one, that they have to be at a skill set of like accomplished Yngwie Malmsteen shredder that just sits there. And you can watch his videos. And if you don't know who he is, just, pause and just Google arpeggios from hell.
Just Yngwie. Just Google Yngwie. Yep.
And what do you get? You get this guy that's always just like, this is too complicated for you. And then so it's, of course, in your head, oh, this is too complicated for me. Here's the thing. It's not. What you need to know are some very basic chord structure. But then, to me, the most important thing, these are the three things that I think people have to look out for. And once you do, this is the formula I used for figuring out different genres, different styles, is the voicing. That's the most important thing. People are like, I only know 4 chords. Good. That's all you need to know. Stop right there. But you need to find, because if we're talking about in the context of sync, in the context of production music, it's feel and emotion. I want you to find 7 different ways to play those same chords, the same key, because each one should feel different. I want something that feels jangly. I want something that feels like tension. I want something that feels like poppy. I want something that feels like punk. I want something that, if you can do that level right there, cool. Awesome. Stop. That's all you need, because we're in the business of feel and emotion. So start with voicing. The next thing is, to me, where people get, I guess, a little worried is like strumming. Because my theory is whatever decade you grew up in is the strumming habit you've digested. So whatever you listen to, you don't realize it, but it's just embrace. I think it's because when we're, at that age of like 16, 17, it's the hormones, it's a mixture, it's just imprinted even more. We're like,
whatever music was popular in high school, that's what's going to get stuck on you.
So if you grew up in the 80s and it was nothing but hair metal for you, or like something, then that's that's the pattern. Or if it's in the early 60s and it was during a Dylan era of like, folky strum, or like a Peter, Paul and Mary, or if we're talking like, then that's where you're going to go. To me, you've got to be conscious of the strum, because the strum is, I should be able to isolate my guitar and be able to tell the structure of the song and the story and where I'm at. If I'm not, then I need to go back to that. It should never look like, I guess, kind of like that solid just line of just like across. But it should, have those ebbs and those flows, because then awesome. If I can do that and communicate my guitar emotionally in my strumming with the correct voicing, there we go. Because, what if it's like an emotional Grey's Anatomy scene? Yeah. What if it's that deeply like, it's not a complex, overcrowded production, but like thought-provoking. Like I'm setting up a scene of something's happening.
I gotta tell you, where being a percussionist and being a keyboard percussionist as well. So like I have a vibraphone downstairs, and so piano, get it, low on the left, high on the right. It's all like whole, half, whole, half, get it. What really throws me for guitar, and I know this is so...
Yeah. No, it's not.
I look at it and I'm like, okay, all right. So one string is chromatic. Okay. But this one is like a 5th up or a 4th, but it's chromatic. And so so I get really turned around in the intervals and the shape. And I know like shapes are a thing, that's where my brain turns to mush because I am such a linear visual thinker when it comes to music. So that's why I've had a really hard time doing anything beyond just open tunings and and power chords.
And that's okay. Here's what I would say too, because that's another thing where I get people are like the fretboard. Mike, I'm confused because, I started with piano and, we can go to middle C. There's only one. There's not 20 middle Cs, where guitar is like, okay, so here's G here and here's C, but actually this C is also here and it's the exact same C. And it's like, wait a minute, what do you mean the exact same one? It's the same one, just another place to find it. So which one should I play? That's a great question. It's dependent. So it can seem overwhelming. That's where I'm always like, when you start memorizing your fretboard, don't worry about any other strings except your 6th and your 5th. That's it. And most guitars, a good chunk of them, you find your dots on 3, 5, and 7. 3, 5, and 7. So start with just those.
Now, when you say 5th and 6th, do you mean the high ones, the ones closest?
Okay,
so this is always confused. The top string or
So the very thickest string on your guitar, that's your 6th string.
6th string.
I know
okay,
it seems like it's always like, because it's the same thing. People are like 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, I know how you're counting, but I want you to go from your thinnest string, which is your 1st string, all the way up to your thickest. So what we predominantly play power chords. That's your 6th string, your 5th string. If we just start on the 3rd fret, 5th fret, and 7th fret, that's G, A, B. Okay. And then C, D, E is on the 5th string, which is 3, 5, and 7. Just start there. Don't worry about anything else. So if you know a power chord shape, play me a C power chord and just think as you're playing it. That's a C power chord.
Yeah. Now, is the 6th string also called the top string, or is that the 1st string?
Now, here's the thing. There are certain teachers that will call it different things. And to me, I always just say, go. So that's why I always cover it where I'm like, your thickest string, the 6th string. I just go like,
gotcha.
We could say low E too, depending on what you're tuned. So every teacher has
unless you're ukulele and then the G and yep.
And then if we do mandolin, if we do banjo, then suddenly all of that logic's thrown out the window and it's like, oh.
I got to tell you, ukulele was kind of a gateway drug for me because I was just like, okay, before I got into ukulele, it was all power chords. It was like all power chords, but something clicked with the ukulele. The fact that it's very easy to play. It's only 4 strings. I'm like, I have only 4 fingers that I can use. So I'm not having to really muss with more than that. And it's nylon strings, easy to play, kind of easy on the fingers. It's super portable. They're not very expensive. Hold down one chord, one note, and you get, and so it became kind of the gateway. It helped wire some guitar brain neurons so that when I went to the acoustic and I was like, okay, let's do an open D tuning and it really, really helped it out. So
and that's the thing, it's different for everyone. It doesn't have to be, it must be that, but like slowly getting into, because what are you doing when you do ukulele? You're forcing yourself to do some chord changes and start memorizing patterns. And that is essentially how I look at guitar, is just like, okay, here's the shape that I want that gets me a major chord. What type, what key am I going for? Because then if I can do that, then I can start to maneuver around. And I think it's also, especially with guitar, it's being patient, because people are like, I'm not learning it fast enough. There's buzzing in the strings. Oh yeah, you'll get tons of that.
Yeah, and your fingers are going to hurt and all that. Yeah.
All the calluses, but keep in mind what you're doing it for. And that's where it's like, I'm very goal-oriented, where I'm like, this is what is happening. So if somebody is starting out for this, ask yourself, why do you want to do this? For a lot of people that come to our community, it's because they understand, if I add this one thing to being a lyricist, if I add this one thing as, let's say I'm great at melody, if I add this extra thing to it, the level of my kind of like songwriting credibility goes up a little bit, because now I can communicate ideas more effectively. I can listen to a song that I'm trying to emulate or try to pick apart, and I can start being like, oh yeah, here's the thing that we're going to do. We're going to do some root and thirds, because like this poppier song has a more airier feel, as opposed to this one, which is a Jason Mraz, which is kind of bar chord and a little bit more percussive. If you can just keep that in mind, like that's why you're doing it, I think that's where you get a little bit more patient with yourself, because you're like, oh, no wonder not everybody goes around and goes like, I can do this. And if they do, it's sometimes we're kind of like, That's a little sloppy.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's like this in your community, but I know the 52 Qs community, where often so many of the members are already accomplished musicians in their own right. They might be music directors, they might be worship leaders in their church. They might be singer-songwriters, but maybe on keyboard. And so when you go to like pick up a new instrument and learn production music, it's like you want your 10,000 hours to count for something, right? But it really doesn't. You can't. It's not like transfer credits at university. You can't transfer 10,000 hours of piano technique to the guitar. Some of the credits will transfer, but you're not coming in as a junior or a senior. You're coming in as a second semester freshman.
And definitely within our community, we have people that have been songwriting for a really long time, maybe 20 years, 30 years. And, guitar has been their primary instrument. But finding a new way to communicate, because the big thing I do push a lot, I talk about active listening. I talk a lot about active listening because I'm like, I don't care what you want to write like. Find what you want to do and start listening to a lot of it. So if you were crazy about folk music, in the 60s, cool. I want you to listen to new folk music. I want you to go listen to like First Aid Kit. I want you to listen to some Sarah Watkins. I want you to listen to some Sarah Jarosz. Really be pulled out of the box a little bit. Because if you can pull your listening ear out of the box a little bit, then that, some of the things that you're going to start doing technically that you got to work on, you're going to be comfortable going out of that box a little bit more. So I think active listening is kind of that gateway drug to just kind of like the good drug.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have found that, we talked about, the 10,000 hours, which is the whole Malcolm Gladwell kind of outliers thing. I think you'll find that the curve won't be quite as, the learning curve won't be as steep. Like you will get better faster picking up a second or third instrument than you did the first instrument, because you're not having to learn like, what's music? What are whole notes, right? What is a chord? And it's kind of like learning your first foreign language, right? So if you are an English speaker and you speak Spanish, or you learn Spanish and you get fluent in it, then picking up French is a little bit easier. And picking up German is even easier because you're able to bring the conceptual things to the table, and then it's just a matter of kind of putting your fingers where your brain knows they should be.
I think absolutely, because like since piano was my first instrument, I felt really fluid. But for the longest time when I was learning guitar as like a teenager and even my early 20s, I just saw them separate because I was just like, well, that's a guitar thing, this is a piano thing. And then one day when I started to get into this composition where I was like, wait a minute. Okay, so G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, 3, 5, 2, 3, 5, 2, 4. That's a major. Oh,
The clouds parted.
I had to, when I started teaching, teach this in a way that was consumable for someone that was already had apprehension. That's okay. It's okay to have that apprehension, but making it in a way that's like, listen, just start right here. This is it. And if we can do this little bit, and think of the mountain of things that we've done in our lives that are impossible, that are crazy. Even just getting here. I forget what the statistic of like, how many, before we're born, how many have to fight to get there. We made it. So it's like, if we can do that journey to cling, to come into an existence, I think the benefits and the ability of a person to learn some aspect of guitar to enhance their productions, because I view that as texture. Because when people ask me, what do you think of guitar? I see it as texture, not the primary focus. It's texture. I feel you can.
And it really is a superpower. If you're listening to this, or if you're watching this right now and you're vaguely interested in guitar, do it. Absolutely do it. Because like I said earlier, a guitar played in just a rudimentary level, 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100 is going to be more effective than an expertly programmed plugin. So speaking of folks who might be wanting to get into it, any guitar recommendations you can make? Like with acoustic guitar or electric guitar, because that's another moment of paralysis, where you like, okay, I'm going to go into my local Sam Asher Guitar Center and I'm going to walk through the door and then immediately turn around and walk out, because it's just like a wall of guitars and a guy over here shredding and a dude over here is like playing like Andy McKee style or whatever. It can be really super overwhelming. So any gear recommendations?
This is the question I probably get the most. It's like, what guitar should I get? And here's what I would say. The biggest thing is, before you order it, and I recommend, if you can get it used, I look at the majority of the guitars that I have and I'm like, that one was used, that one was used, that one was used, that one. I never bought it new. For the most part, I bought a lot of my gear used because there's a lot out there on Reverb that you get great deals. Before you do that, go to a guitar center. And I want you to just hold the guitar and just sit with it, because sometimes people are buying these guitars that are like an acoustic where their hands all the way out and they're like, this body's huge and this is not, and they're like
a mariachi player, like reaching all the way around. You're like, I think the guitar is too big for you.
They're like, this is really awkward. It's like, yeah, it's because the body's gigantic. They're different sizes. So it's like, you don't have to strum the guitar, but I just want you to hold it. And does it feel awkward? Now, most people would be like, it always feels awkward. But ask yourself, like, if you're small, don't get a ginormous jumbo body guitar, but actually get like, something like a Yamaha Mini, a Taylor Mini that's super tiny, but it's just like, oh, your arms aren't all the way out. It's light. Something where you feel like you can sit and like, yeah, I could do this. If you're new to electric, the biggest thing I will always recommend, you don't have to go for those crazy standard, like, I'm getting the Les Paul, I'm getting and it's like, how about you start with a good old Fender Mexican Telecaster Strat? Because you know what? Those are great.
Yep, that's a Mexican Strat back there.
I have the exact same one. I have the same color too, because I love that. I love that aqua color. But to me, those are just as great. And, and people are like, well, what's the difference between the Mexican and the American made? Like $200. So if you don't want to spend, and to me, they sound amazing.
And I mean, are you really going to have the ability to tell the difference? Like as a drummer, I can tell the difference between like a DW 5000 pedal and a Pearl Eliminator pedal, right? Because I know. But to an untrained person, it's a pedal.
Never in my life has, I sent something off and like a supervisor or library been like, listen, we really would love for you to use that American Delight. And I would love for them to say it so I could go out and, tell my fiance, Jen, listen, it wasn't me. They told me I needed to get it. So that's why I'm doing it for us.
That's right.
I'm doing
they needed the vintage
baby.
Gibson, SG. And if I didn't, then they're not going to sign the queue.
I'm sorry. I can't help it. Here's the Sweetwater candy. This is my peace offering. I'll take the guitar. But it's never has that happened. So it's like there's so many good guitars out there that are used and reasonably priced. My best piece of advice is hold it. That's my first thing. How does it feel? If it starts to feel like, yeah, this is comfortable, awesome. Ask yourself, what are you trying to play? If you were telling me, hey, I really want to get into like, some cool Gregory Alan Isaacoff kind of like, folky vibe, cool, awesome. Let's, you don't need the electric right now, but you need like a pretty, a nice little acoustic. Next thing is if you're telling me like, hey, I want to write some Aces style, like indie pop. Awesome. You don't need that acoustic. I would go for something like probably a Strat, because you're, that Stratocaster, if you're like Americana, I'm like, cool. I think that Tele, because every guitar does have a particular sound. So ask yourself, what are you trying to build a lot of, or what do you want to write a lot of? And if you're not sure yet, that's okay. But don't necessarily, invest that huge amount right away. Everything that I bought, and I think, you'll probably agree with this, like when somebody comes to my studio, wow, look, and I'm like, okay, please remember, this was overtime. This was not one day I was just like, swipe, baby. It was like a little bit.
Yeah, look at the studio in the background here.
Yeah.
You know, the drums. This is 35 years of career, just amassing gear over the time. Like I had when I went to get an acoustic, I was like, okay, I know I want to do a lot of fingerstyle stuff. I was studying like Travis picking and all of that, so I think it's really, really cool because I know from a production music standpoint, that type of thing is really hard to pull off, and I just enjoy listening to that. Right. And there's a percussiveness to it that really kind of, triggers my brain. And so I went to Guitar Center and they had a used Big Baby Taylor. And it's like 15/16 scale, which, come on, just give me the 1/16, but it's 15/16. And so it's a thinner kind of body. So I didn't feel like I was holding like a mariachi bass or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's really nice. It's a Taylor. Does it have electronics? No, I'm never going to perform it live. I was always going to mic it up. Yes. And so all of these things that I had read were minuses, were absolutely pluses to me. And to have a nice Taylor guitar that was beyond just the $99 kind of packaged Ibanez deal or whatever. Not bagging on Ibanez's, but it was a used guitar, and I've really, really enjoyed just playing it, let alone recording it and putting it on cues.
That's when you know that's the guitar that you should buy. Because if you're also like, it's all purpose, but I would just also play that. Like, I want to pick it up more, because most of the time people don't pick up their guitar, not because they don't think they can do it. They just don't like how it feels. It feels unnatural. It's too big. It's too large. When somebody gets a guitar that's appropriate, and this is what I would suggest too, I guess, and every climate's different, but have it on a stand where you can see it. When you see your guitar, you're more likely to pick it up. What I've noticed, it's a small thing, but when a student would come back to me in the early days and be like, I didn't practice this week, I'm like, cool. Was it out of your case? Well, no, because I knew I was it's just like, yeah, you were coming back here in 4 days, but like, get it out of, because then you see it and it's that reminder. So even if you don't pick it up, you go like, oh, it's like not picking, I'd imagine, I don't have children, but like not picking up your child from school. You're that parent that's like, oh, I forgot. Oh, and then you rush there to get it and like, I'm so sorry. That's how I feel when sometimes I don't pick up my guitar. I'm like, I see it and it's like, hey, also play me.
Yeah, well, out of sight, out of mind.
Yep.
Not to mention, we've talked about this on the channel before, that if you're in the creative flow state, you need to have instruments and mics. You need to have them all at hand, because if you're like, what would be great here? Some acoustic guitar, and I'm going to get up from my desk and go over to the closet or wherever it is and unzip it and tune it up. That whole process is decelerating your creative flow state. But if you can just go yoink and then and you're ready. Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny you mentioned that, because a book I love called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And she talks about just the creative state and flow. She talks about this one poet who felt like she always got this inspiration, and she had a limited time window of when she got it to the pen and paper. And if she didn't get there soon enough, it was gone.
It would evaporate. Yeah.
And to me, what you're talking about too is so important. Just having things ready to go so that it's not like, that's a perfect idea. Okay, so let's see. What closet was it in? It's just, there's so much lag.
Yeah, and I know, I've had guitarist friends who've watched the podcast and say, you shouldn't hang your guitars up. It's gonna make the strings age faster. And I'm like, well, I think that's a small price to pay for accessibility.
At this point, shout out to GHS Strings. Love that company. Just cleaning your strings regularly. You'd be surprised how often, if you just do that maybe every other day, the longevity of your strings gets better. So it's okay.
Yeah. Excellent. And that's a whole other side of it.
Yeah, it is.
Like changing strings and everything feels like, oh man, my Taylor needs the strings. They had the Elixir strings, after a while they'll start kind of fraying out, which is the only real downside to Elixirs. They feel great, but when they go, they're and they're done.
You just see it. The first time I ever got a guitar, I got this dates me. It came with a VHS on how to play guitar and how to tune. And like I put it in, and then so I'm tuning, and there was a moment where it had to, I was like, hold on. And of course I do that thing where you pause the VHS, and then the VHS at the time, the screen flips, and I was tuning, but I was tuning the wrong, I was turning the tuning peg the wrong one. And I'm like, God, this is not breaks. And I haven't even played it. And to me, it was just like,
oh man,
I don't even know what to do. And it was like me and my dad for like, and you would think it was brain surgery at first. Like we were just like, all right. Okay, so what string? Which one? I don't know.
Cut the blue wire, Dad. The blue wire, not the green wire.
Yeah, turns into a MacGyver episode suddenly.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that I do get a little overwhelmed with. But I mean, YouTube, man.
Yeah.
Like I changed the strings on my ukulele, which involved like freaking Boy Scout knots and stuff. And YouTube to the rescue.
Exactly.
I was able to do it.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike, if folks want to know more, because you are a guitarist, you're a guitar educator, where can they go to find more from you? And I know that you have some educational resources. Let's talk a little bit about that.
I do. So if they go to songwritingforguitars.com, there's a ton of free resources where they can get on. They can download my quick start guide, which gives them 4 simple voicings that they can start practicing right now and actually relate artists to and styles. So they can start to see like where they fall into. And if they're trying to write for something, why isn't it sounding like it? And where can they start going to move in that direction? And also too, we have a course called Guitar Essentials, which to me in a world of, which is great, YouTube is wonderful and I love it. But for everyone, sometimes that can be like a rabbit hole of like, you watch the first one and goes, suggest this one. You're like, oh my, I must watch the next one. Then you watch 20 other ones and you're like, this will take forever. I feel like the Titanic lady,
this is assuming you
later.
You didn't get like, that's assuming you didn't get pulled off into watching like Star Trek, like breakdown videos or like, chemtrails and all that stuff.
Mine is Gordon Ramsay. That's my downfall. I could watch anything Gordon Ramsay, but the idea behind Guitar Essentials for the modern songwriter is to boil it down to the core basics. What essentially does matter for guitar? How can we compartmentalize how I was talking about voicings, strumming patterns, and the third one, techniques? How can you start relating these to songs for your productions, whatever it is, so that you can authentically replicate the genres you're trying to write for? So because with guitar, it's not a one size fits all. I got this shape and it works for everything. No, if you just change, and there's sometimes like these little levers too, where if you just move them around, they make all the difference. And if all the difference is that your thing gets accepted into the library, you get more session work because people know that, you're reliable, you're providing quality, rhythm tracks, which I didn't realize when I started out was like a huge thing, necessity. I took for granted playing to a metronome and voicings and strumming patterns was like this. But when I did that realm, it was amazing how there's a need. And so this course is just really speaking in. I even walk through examples of things in productions that I've written and break down like, here's all the guitar parts I used and why. Because to me, that was so important when I was learning to watch people build. But then, of course, I would inevitably ask like, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you any questions. 2 seconds later. So why did you do that thing? I totally lied. I had tons of questions. And so to me, giving that resources for anybody, regardless if you've been playing for 20 years or you just got your guitar and all of it seems overwhelming, bite-sized chunks consistently, and just working you to a path of your end goal, which is adding it into your songs. That's why you want to do it. That's why especially if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably putting together productions and you want to get in more libraries. You want to have that flow of like, when you get that brief that if it has guitar, you're not like, I back away from, like slow.
Yeah, there's so many briefs that I don't even shoot for because I'm like, nope, can't do that. Nope. And it's not just like rock, folks. No. It can be used in hip hop. It can be used, guys, all over like tension music and So I
think the big one is tension music for me. People are like, do you do a lot of rock? And I'm like, I just did a whole bunch of like Shark Week stuff. And all of it were really big, like ambient swells and light root and thirds that were behind like synth and just like developing, because they weren't playing a really crazy pattern, but man, it was like, ooh, that's eerie, because it feels like it belongs there.
And if you can put one recorded element onto a track, it's going to elevate your cue, especially, as we're recording this, AI, there's this huge groundswell of AI, and as good as AI can get, and as good as plugins and everything can get, there is something about a human with their hands on an instrument that gets recorded. And so being able to, if you are looking for a way to create separation in originality and in creativity and that intangible something that libraries are looking for, I firmly believe that it's in recorded elements. And so, reach for a guitar. Instead of buying that guitar library, go buy a guitar, spend some time with Mike over in his courses and do that. Not to mention, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's easier.
Dude,
like it's so much easier to like lay down a ukulele track than to fiddle with a ukulele plugin.
And you're going to
get results.
You're going to get, as you said, like just like the human element. You and I talked about this, I think, last time off. But Doctor Who, I always think of, why do the Daleks always fall? Because they don't have that human imagination. Yeah. And so AI is really cool and it's awesome. And I think it's going to, I don't see it as a threat. People are worried. I'm like, it's going to be cool. It's going to be, it'll be like texting. It'll just be a thing that, years later, we're just like, it's always been like that. But a human goes like, how about we add guitar, but we do it in this way, and then we do this and this and this. Why? That's weird. Yeah, let's try it. It's probably going to be awesome, or it'll be a train wreck. Either way, but it leads to a path of just like all those little nuances. When you watch someone recording, you're like, oh, I love using guitar through Isotope vocoder. Like, it sounds bizarre and weird. Way better on guitar than vocals. I love it every time I use it.
Yeah. So, of course, we are going to have links to everything from Mike, including songwriting for guitar and the courses that he offers. And Mike, man, again, I could talk to you all afternoon, but unfortunately, we've already gone almost an hour here. But man, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for having me over on your podcast. Really enjoyed hanging out with your folks over there. But we'll have all the links and in the show notes. And again, Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Dave, thanks for having me. This is so good. Yeah, it could keep on going forever.
Yep. I'm sure there'll be a part 2. I'm sure there's got to be. But once again, thanks a lot, Mike.
Thanks, man.
Once again, a huge word of thanks to Mike for joining me on the podcast. And be sure to check out all of his links. They're in the description below. So that's going to do it for us this week. You definitely want to tune in next week, where I ask you the question, do you need to start a YouTube channel? Is having a YouTube channel, or a podcast, but is having a YouTube channel the modern website? Do working production music composers have to? And if you do, I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've learned along the way and give you some tips and some strategies if you're thinking about getting into the YouTube space. But that's going to do it for me. And as always, a huge word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52Qs who help keep all of this going. Again, all of the information about how you can join and support the channel is in the description. So I hope you've had a really good week, and I look forward to seeing you next week. And I know and believe, friends, that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52Qs podcast is copyright 2023 818 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community and submitting your cue for consideration on the podcast, head over to 52qs.com.